Hello class, Tom Clarke here. My book report is on The Abolition of Man by C.S. Lewis. Bibliography of C.S. Lewis. Clive Staples Lewis was born on November 29, 1898 in Northern Ireland. Tragedy struck the Lewis family late in 1908 when his mother, father, and uncle died. He was 10 years old. His education began in 1910 where he attended Campbell College in Belfast, Ireland, but subsequently had to withdraw due to respiratory problems. Lewis was then sent to Malvern, England to recover from his serious lung disorder. After recovery, he attended Malvern College until June of 1913. It was also during this time period that he rejected his Christian faith. After reading and subsequently being inspired by George MacDonald's fantasies, it inspired him, thus turning his mind back towards the notion of godliness. Lewis sat for a scholarship examination at University College, Oxford, where he was accepted and began his studies. 3 years after the beginning of World War I, and 6 months of study at University College, Oxford, Lewis enlisted in the British Army, where he was earmarked for officers' training school. He was subsequently wounded by shrapnel and was discharged from the Army in December of 1919. He was now 21 years old. Lewis began publishing his work in the mid-1920s with his first book, The Satirical Demure, in 1926. However, acclaim came with his publication of The Allegory of Love in 1936, for which he won the Hawthornian Prize. Lewis recovered his faith in 1929, to which he is quoted as saying, "I am perhaps the most dejected and reluctant convert in all of England." In 1952, Lewis published Mere Christianity, wherein he argued faith in God from a logical, not scriptural perspective. Michael Coren observed that Lewis was too subtle to knock people over the head with his faith. He knew that talking was far more effective than shouting. Thus emerged one of the most important apologists, philosophers, and thinkers of the 20th century. Additionally, in the 1950s, Lewis began to publish a series of 7 books, The Chronicles of Narnia, which further established him as an apologist, in that the character, the lion, ruler of Narnia, would come to be interpreted as a representation of Jesus Christ. Initially, the series received negative reviews. However, the public at large embraced this series, which gained worldwide popularity. Renewed interest in this series was established first with the animated film of The Witch and the Wardrobe in 1979, and then the popular feature film in 2005. Lewis became a faculty member of Cambridge University in 1954 and subsequently was elected an honorary fellow of Magdalene College in 1955. He was also elected as an honorary fellow of University College, Oxford in 1958. And in 1959, an honorary degree of Doctorate of Literature was bestowed upon him by the University of Manchester. Lewis's love of fantasy, coupled with his deep thinking and philosophical perspectives, earned him acclaim in the literary world, a craft he began as a young man. However, it is also for his nonfiction work, which places him as one of the foremost thinkers, philosophers, and apologists of the 20th century. C.S. Lewis preferred plain language to Christian jargon to argue the existence of God. As an honored academic and prolific writer, his work has had a far-reaching impact which is still relevant today. Lewis died on November 22, 1963, the same day President Kennedy was slain. Summary. The thesis of this book is, if we debunk and abolish traditional moral values and gain control over the consciousness of man as science has enabled us to control other things in nature, it will result in the eventual abolition of man. These 3 lectures address ethics and value judgments. Lewis also addresses the use of science and technology as a means to modify the human mind. In his first lecture, Men Without Chests, Lewis confronts the conditioning perpetrated by academics, in part by contrasting the Tao, a broad generalization of Eastern and Western unbiased values, with the principles presented in the Green Book, an actual English textbook that contends morality is subjective. The notion of Tao speaks of man having power over himself in a sense truly analogous to an individual's self-control. In other words, something is either right or wrong and is controlled individually. Lewis contends that Gaius and Titus, fictional proponents of the Green Book, are intending to make a clean sweep of traditional values and start with a new set. In other words, the dehumanization of humanity. The abolition of man in total is a reflection of education with special reference to the teaching of English in the upper forms of school. Lewis rightly cites Aristotle in saying, "The aim of education is to make the pupil like and dislike what he ought." Education is not meant to program the human being as one would program an android, to perform the programmed task as desired and on cue. Rather, Lewis rightly observes, the heart never takes the place of the head, but it can and should obey it. In his second lecture, The Way, Lewis continues with his observations relative to the Green Book by saying, the practical result of education in the spirit of the Green Book must be the destruction of the society which accepts it. Lewis appears to be addressing the notion of the conditioner's propensity towards the greater good for the community according to their own ideals. Further, it seems to be the justification for the proponents of the Green Book and their rejection of the Tao. However, it can be said, those who object to the Tao almost always have a value system of their own that they are trying to interject. To further illustrate his position that there are those seeking to alter society by conditioning the young, Lewis states that it is their intention to do so by tearing the child almost from the breast to the crèche and kindergarten in the interest of progress and the coming race. Lewis continues by saying the innovator attacks traditional values, the Tao, in deference to what he supposes to be, in some special sense, rational or biological values. Lewis therefore contends that the values which are used to attack the Tao are in fact derived from it. Lewis begins the conclusion of this lecture by observing, there is a difference between a real moral advance and a mere innovation. He eventually concludes by saying, an open mind in questions that are not ultimate is useful, but an open mind about the ultimate foundations, either of a theoretical or of a practical reason, is idiocy. Time constraints prohibit treatment of the third lecture, The Abolition of Man. Thank you very much.